What is up, everyone? Sergeant Redwood here, and today we're reacting to History Summarized of Africa by Overly Sarcastic Productions. But yeah, this is the last part, aka the second part. And, anyways, let's get started. Misconception number 5. Africa is poor. That's not a misconception. I'm pretty sure it's pretty poor. Like, unless you talk about resources. Like, unless you're talking about resources, then it's pretty poor. But I'm pretty sure they're gonna use that and say that's why it's a misconception.
Africa is poor. Short answer, yeah, kind of, but...
Also, one more thing, like, it says History Summarized of Africa, but we're halfway in the video, and they're only talking about misconceptions, not the actual history. Like, I don't know how they're going to cover the entire history of Africa in 10 minutes. If they just stop here. So, anyways.
Not really? You see, poverty is a weird concept, and not one that transfers clearly
Oh
from
my
culture
gosh.
to culture. To the herding
Really?
pastoralists, wealth was in...
So then we're gonna... Okay. So he's pretty much saying that the definition of poverty is subjective. And therefore, Africa just isn't poor at all. So then I guess no place on earth is poor, no place on earth is rich, according to that. Let's look it up online. Okay, that's how we can find an objective thing. Definition of poor. Lacking sufficient money to live at a standard considered comfortable or normal in a society. I would say that doesn't go with the definition that he's saying. Second definition, worse than usual, expected, or desirable. Considered to be deserving of pity or sympathy. So I would say overall, I don't really agree with him. Let me know what y'all think in the comments.
cows, but to the Europeans, wealth was in money, land, and gold. Each considered the other to be hilariously impoverished. But there's no denying that there are parts of Africa that are poor by any standards, where the standards of living are just kinda god-awful. And since there's no denying that, I won't. But I will deny the idea that Africa is just somehow naturally poor. So let's rewind.
That's not what the misconception said. I wish you would have put, like... I wish you'd been more specific, like... misconception in Africa as naturally poor. Because you're saying that it's poor is true. But now he's talking about how it's naturally poor. Which, he's right about that. It isn't. So, I don't know, I just wish he would have, like, specified that at the beginning. But
There were
yeah.
African slaves in China and Portuguese forts in Africa centuries before Europe officially set their sights on full-on
In China? What? I did not know that. That's crazy.
colonization. In the late 1800s, colonization went into overdrive when all of Europe wanted in. During that time, the British discovered massive stores of gold and diamond under some of South Africa's finest farmland. And what were they to do besides evict the locals from their prime farmland and start constructing mines for the stuff? We've already discussed that farming in Africa is hard because rains can be unreliable, but now people were getting thrown off the farmland that actually worked and being stuck with lame, desiccated badlands that didn't produce anywhere near as much food. That's step 1 of the push into poverty. Step 2 was taxes. See, those mines were full of gold and diamonds, but the Europeans couldn't and didn't want to dig it all up themselves, so they started taxing the local Africans for money. What money? Well, if they didn't have money, they had to earn money by working in the mines.
Oh my
Here we
gosh.
actually see the roots of the system of apartheid because the colonists wanted to keep things efficient. Specifically, they didn't want to have to financially support anyone who wasn't pulling their weight by working in the mines. So the mining cities were totally closed off. Only people with a work pass could actually get in and live there. African men would come into work and they'd get paid just enough to live in the city and eat stuff, but their families would be kept out of the city, living in second and third rate farmlands, trying desperately not to starve. This was
Jeez.
already a system of controlling who was allowed to live where and who was allowed to work where. It's easy to see how this later evolved into the system of apartheid. The other way
Yeah.
the colonists got workers for the mines was by building prisons and locking people up for crimes both real and imagined, wherein they would be
What?
put to work in the mines.
Imagine. What is...
Fun fact, Making this extensive prison system and throwing in both really bad criminals and total innocents had the unfortunate side effect of leading to the creation of a very scary underworld/gang thing called the Umkosi Wezintaba, also known as
What the heck is that?
which basically wreaked havoc through South Africa for the better part of 40 years. So, long story short, parts of Africa are very poor, but for the most part they're poor because of colonization. And speaking of colonization, if you take a
What in the heck is that? What am I looking at right now? Huh? What? Huh? What? Huh? Okay, I did see in the description that there was something about the map of Africa that was wrong. I think that's what it's talking about. Yup, right here. I use map of Africa with some braver borders. Yeah, you think? What in the heck is why is Somalia doubled in size? And Kenya just exploded? South Sudan is big. Freaking, what in the heck is going on right now? The two Congos are together. And what in the heck? I'm so confused. And not just Africa. What the heck is wrong with the Middle East? And I think that's Catalonia up there in that tiny little bit. Greece has control of freaking part of Turkey. And then this looks sort of like it would be an ethnic map or a linguistic map or something like that. Something like that. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. That's a weird map.
Take a look at Africa's modern borders, you'll notice something unique to Africa and parts of the Middle East. Straight lines. Most societies find natural
Literally, the Europeans did not care about making correct borders. They just arbitrarily did them. But also, fun fact, Europeans intentionally, especially Britain and France, they intentionally made the borders of the Middle East straight lines so that it would cause a bunch of conflict to happen there, which would make them not able to become strong and have to rely on the Europeans.
Borders like mountains, rivers, plains, or other places where you just naturally stop. In the absence of any such natural borders, societies will often mark territorial bounds based on cultural groupings instead. The fact that Africa has multiple straight borders means that those were drawn by people who weren't familiar with local politics or cultural groupings. The post-colonial borders left Africa a mess, with friendly groups being separated from each other, parts of a group being separate from itself, and unfriendly groups being lumped together. This is by far the most effective way to leave a continent predisposed to a century of various civil wars. People were thrown together into new nations with little rhyme or reason and were largely forced to adopt entirely new political structures. These borders were drawn carelessly by...
Yeah, and currently there's like a ton of conflicts that are happening everywhere. Like, I read this one book about a bunch of conflict happening in the Congo. Like, oh my goodness, there's so many tribes that are fighting with each other for dominance and stuff. Because, like, I don't know. One tribe, like, rules everything and they give special privileges to the tribe they're with. And then everyone else, like, are sort of subjugated, and then they rebel and fight back, and it leads to all this, like, bloody conflict.
People who just didn't know. But even if the borders were drawn with an eye to ethnic and cultural groupings, the inherent unpredictability of African weather and the necessity of regularly mild to moderate migration would make those borders obsolete within years. Colonialism forced a set of constructs and rules that flat out don't work with the way Africa is, and that's a huge reason that Africa's recent legacy is one of severe political strife and economic adversity. And here's misconception number 6. Africa didn't have technology. Now here's where stuff gets tricky, because
Well, they didn't have modern technology in most places, except for places like Egypt, Nigeria, South Africa, places like that are rich in Africa. And also, like, the thing was, the Africans were not experienced in, like, I can't talk. I'm just gonna play the video.
Very few cultures in Africa actually wrote much stuff down, instead relying on oral tradition to transmit information through the ages. In fact, in West Africa especially, storytellers and other such history keepers were almost revered, and considered absolutely vital to the workings of a healthy empire. The act of telling a story itself was very delicate and ritualistic. In some rare cases, a carefully guarded written document would record the most essential aspects of a story, but for the most part, an oral tradition was the basis for information. And this means that, unfortunately, all it takes is a cultural disruption big enough to cut off one generation from the next. Just one, to destroy any and all information exclusively transmitted by in-person teachings. And wouldn't you know, cultural disruption is just about the best phrase possible to describe what happened in Africa from the 1400s onward. This makes archaeology, anthropology, and other such history-finding fields rather more difficult than in parts of the world that wrote stuff down more regularly. Back to the point. Since the methods by which various technologies were crafted were also passed down orally, a lot of them got lost in the colonization process too. And in the absence of any written records, it was easy for everyone to assume that there just wasn't anything there in the first place. For quite a while, we didn't actually know what kind of stuff was invented and what tech the various civilizations in pre-colonial Africa had lying around.
Fun fact, though, I think plastic surgery was literally invented. There was a lot of inventions that were invented in Africa that we literally didn't know about. And yeah, it's pretty interesting to read about.
Because Europe had muddled our chances of ever finding out. In fact, part of the reason why those advances don't have any physical evidence lying around is because a lot of them were in medicine. In the West African city of Djenné, for instance, cataract removal surgery was a surprisingly common practice at a time where Europe had no such thing. And in a similar vein, Africans in what is currently Uganda and Rwanda were reported to have been performing consistently reliable C-sections in at least the 1800s with an expertise that implied the practice was in fact much older. And this was at a time when it had made global news that British Dr. James Miranda Stewart Barry, who, fun fact, was also biologically female, had managed to perform the first successful C-section in the entire history of the British Empire. Another medical advance happened in southern Kenya at some point where the Maasai people, one of those herding societies I mentioned earlier, figured out how to suture blood vessels and intestines using ants of all things.
What does suture mean?
Thanks. And in other fun medical news, the Akan people in West Africa figured out how to immunize themselves to smallpox. This news reached America in the early 1700s at a time when smallpox was tearing through both Native Americans and the colonists. Cotton Mather first learned about the inoculation procedure by way of his slave, Onesimus, who explained the procedure he remembered undergoing as a child in West Africa that had made him immune to the disease. Mather proceeded to go on an inoculating campaign in Boston and get elected to the Royal Society for his quote-unquote innovation, while Onesimus...
Oh my gosh, really? That's kind of sad how we don't know this guy's name, because that's pretty cool.
Onesimus fell out of the history books in 1717 after attempting to buy his freedom. Other fun advances in technology included metalworking, and we only found out this one recently because a professor at Brown had actually tracked down a few members of the Haya people who had managed to preserve the oral tradition containing the information for building furnaces and smelting iron. When he analyzed the furnace and the iron it produced, he found that it reached temperatures of 1800 degrees Celsius, which was around 200 degrees hotter than anything contemporary European smelting practices could produce.
Wow.
They had been using this to make carbon steel for 2,000 years, which meant that they had it at a time when the
2,000 years
was Sri Lanka, and they were only able to hit those temperatures because they were powering their furnaces with monsoon winds. Now here's one last misconception that I think might actually be at the heart of all the other misconceptions I've talked about so far. Africa is just less developed than the rest of the world. Now,
What? I'm pretty sure it is. I think if you look at freaking Zimbabwe and then look at freaking Sweden, I think you might possibly, just maybe, see a difference. You know, just my opinion. Like, what? I'm like, yes, it is. I'm pretty sure it is.
what does that mean? Real question, I'm not just being snarky here. How do...
Development, I would say that means like technological advancement, GDP per capita, the amount of infrastructure. It's like that kind of stuff, like the implementation of modern technology, like with, you know, I mean by like, what I mean with that is like modern cars, modern medicine, computers and all of that. Like, that's sort of what I mean. I think that's what develop means. But I should probably look it up just to be sure while he's talking.
Do we define some places being less or more developed? Well, the concept is actually grounded in an idea that's, surprise, surprise, a couple centuries old. And that idea was that civilization was a sliding scale. In this model, societies evolved like Pokemon rather than like, actual evolution. It happened in stages, and if you found a civilization that seemed way worse than yours, it was just because it hadn't gotten enough sweet XP yet to make the jump from subsistence farming to sleeping on a bed of feudal peasants. From England's perspective, the single goal of humanity was to become an urbanized society, just like England, and everyone else, through no necessary fault of their own, simply hadn't caught on yet. Now, in this model, unglamorous lifestyles like subsistence farming or nomadic hunting and gathering was just a social precursor to proper society, which is what was meant by less developed. Africa was still doing things that the colonist societies had for the most part stopped doing centuries ago. The theory was that stuff like multi-story buildings and irrigation and giant sprawling metropolises would naturally arise from those precursor societies, and they just hadn't figured it out yet. But of course, nowadays we know that societies develop and evolve like organisms do. They form in a given circumstance, change with the environment, and sometimes a new development in the society propels it up the chain.
Where the heck did he go? I think that was in the description too. I made a disclaimer. But how does he define development, though? I don't think we heard that. I think... Well, I guess he's talking about that right now, technically. Oh, yeah. He does say that, anyways.
And makes it easier for it to thrive. But if you just plop down a European city on the edge of the Sahara, the lack of supporting agriculture will...
Oops. Okay.
Can survive, and there's no universal model for society that can survive equally well anywhere. Now, I'm not gonna lie that it is definitely comfier for me to live in a city than it would be for me to practice subsistence farming on a plot of land that might be totally desiccated by next year, but you work with what you've got. That doesn't make a society inherently better or worse, or more or less developed.
What?
Survive, and there's no universal model for society that can survive equally well anywhere. Now,
So you're... What? So you're saying that how they survive in Africa is just fitted towards them? Like, what? No. I'm pretty sure if the Africans... Like, if people in Africa could choose, I think they would choose not to live in the conditions they live in. Like, no.
I'm not gonna lie that it is definitely comfier for me to worse or more or less developed. The fact that we still refer to all non-urbanized societies under the blanket term the developing world is an artifact of colonialism.
No, it's not.
But
I just... Oh my god.
better or worse or more or less developed. The fact that we still refer to all non-urbanized societies under the blanket term the developing
Because I'm pretty sure an agricultural friggin' society is less developed than an urbanized society. Like, I don't understand. Why? Why? That doesn't make any sense.
developing world is an artifact of colonialism. But development isn't even a useful measuring stick to scale the world against. And thanks to Britain, we have centuries of wildly diverse evidence to support the notion that dropping your culture on top of an existing one and expecting everything to work out more often than not leads to catastrophe for everyone involved.
But that didn't have to do with the fact that, like, if Africa was able to develop on its own for a really long time, they would have gotten to the modern technology that Europe has. Eventually. It's not like the technology was incompatible with the African society. It's just that they weren't at the point, like, they were too far behind technologically for it to be properly integrated. Like, they would have to develop it on their own. so they can have what they need. Like, let me put it this way. It's like teaching a 6th grader calculus. Like, you have to wait until they're like in high school or something, when they've learned all the previous stuff. It doesn't mean that they can never learn calculus, and that it's incompatible with their brain. You know what I mean? Does that make sense? That's what I'm trying to get across.
Less developed isn't the same thing as simply different. To sum up, a
But we didn't. No one said that.
might be an untouchable apex predator in the ocean, but it doesn't do so hot in the savannah. Now, for all the reasons described above and more, it would be next to impossible for me to even attempt to provide any type of chronology of Africa. So I hope to be able to go in depth with specific civilizations in the future, but for the sake of not making this already 20-minute video over an hour long, I think it's best that I call it a day here.
I just wish they would have gone through, like, history of Africa chronologically, instead of just a bunch of misconceptions. Like, obviously they can do it whatever they want. I'm just saying, because it says, history summarized. Like, I would have thought they would have done the history of Africa. Like, I feel like a better title would be Top Something Misconceptions of Africa, you know what I mean? But anyways, that was a pretty informative video overall. Thank you guys for watching, and if you want me to react to these people more, because they seem pretty good, then, leave the suggestions in the comments below. I'll put the video link in the description so you can subscribe to them. I'm already subscribed to them. But yeah. Thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Well, everyone, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like it and subscribe to my channel. And, turn on the notification bell thingy. And if you didn't, then make sure to leave a thumbs down. But yeah, that would be greatly appreciated. And while you're at it, go ahead and watch my other videos. They're probably just as good, and if not better than this one right now. Except for my oldest videos, don't watch those. And, subscribe to these people down here, my fellow sergeants. They're other YouTubers that I either know or I have in high regards. Yeah, even my cat agrees. So, thank you for watching, and have a great day.